Welcome to our first career huddle. And I'm thrilled to introduce you to Alan Gonsenhauser, who has joined us to share what he's learned about the wonderful and occasionally wacky world of fractional CMOing. Alan founded his company, DemandRevenue, in early 2021 and currently serves as a fractional CMO, interim CMO, and advisor, mentor, and coach to CMOs and VPs of marketing at multiple private equity-owned health, IT, SaaS software, technology, and digital health firms. Prior to forming DemandRevenue, Alan spent 6 years at SiriusDecisions and Forrester as a CMO Executive Advisor and Analyst, mentoring 108 CMOs to help them drive marketing excellence and cross-functional alignment. So, all right, Alan, let's dive in. You've been quite a journey, because you and I have talked about this quite a bit over the last few years. Let's start with your decision to go fractional. What led you to believe that this would actually be a good thing for you?
Well, first of all, Drew, thank you very much. I'm thrilled to be here with you and everybody today. And just make one comment up front. We're really all interim or fractional, whether we know it or not, with the average life of, tenure of a CMO being, I think, on average, 24 to 27 months now, something like that.
I tried not to read those numbers, Alan.
Okay.
Yes, that is certainly what the data suggests.
So my story, I kind of fell into it, Drew. It wasn't that I planned it that way. I fell into it, and I'm very happy that I did. So what happened was, just a little background. So I was a serial CMO and general manager at multiple companies. Then I spent 6 years at SiriusDecisions. We were acquired by Forrester. The Forrester model was a bit different. They wanted analysts to generate IP versus, grow businesses and work a lot with sales and, support customers as much. So it wasn't as much of a fit for me. So it just wasn't a fit anymore. So I left in February of 2021, and I couldn't believe how quickly things happened. It was serendipity, and a series of coincidences. And this story is about networking more than anything else, leveraging our networks, because it all came from there. So the first thing that happened is I noticed on Twitter that one of my past clients was rebranding from SyncSort to Precisely. I don't know if anybody knows Kevin Ruane. I believe he's also a member here.
Yes, he is.
So I said, Kevin, congratulations. Sounds like a great name. And he goes, Alan, can we talk? And I said, sure, Kevin. And then we spoke, and he said, would you be willing to do some consulting? I said, well, Kevin, I just left Forrester a couple of weeks ago. I haven't even updated my resume yet, but I'd love to work with you again. So on April 1st, I started 1 day a week with Precisely, doing quarterly projects. First quarter was on, getting sales and marketing on the same page with demand. Second quarter was a product to audience transformation. Third quarter was all about customer-led growth and looking at the post-sale, pre and post-sale customer experience. That's the first thing that happened. Second thing that happened at the same time, from a totally different part of my network, someone I've been networking with for years. I don't know if anybody knows Dwight Griesman. He's a fractional as well. And there are great stories how we networked together in the past. But he goes, Alan, I know you have a lot of experience in health IT. Would you mind speaking to this company? I said, sure. And so I spoke to the investor, private equity investor, and the C-suite. And also on April 1st, 2021, so I was 1 day a week with Kevin and his group at Precisely. I started as the interim CMO of what was nThrive, what is now FinThrive, which is a 450 million revenue cycle management company. I started there as interim CMO 4 days a week. So a few weeks after I left Forrester, I was busy 5 days a week. And frankly, I was making twice as much as I made full-time. And it's gone for 2 years with them and other clients. The coincidence was both of these companies, and just a complete coincidence, were owned by the same private equity firm. So then I also worked with another portfolio company of that private equity firm and a venture-funded company as interim CMO or fractional CMO that came from a past boss of mine. So I just kind of fell into it.
So let me pause and break a few things down here. So for folks, so the part that you're sort of understating in my mind is that you spent years building a network and maintaining a network and talking to people in the network and nurturing these relationships. So the fact that on day one of the, you accidentally set up a shingle because you had this network. So I'm gonna just put a big important bullet on that, is that if you were to start tomorrow and say any of the folks listening would say, I'm going to be a fractional CMO, and you don't have a network, it's hard to imagine that you would have a 5 days worth of work as a fractional CMO, right? I mean, because those were purely people who knew you well, and suddenly you were available.
Well, the folks at FinThrive didn't. I mean, the lead came from someone who knew.
Right.
Me.
Well, that's all that matters.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a big part of this consideration, and I think it's important. Now, the other thing I'm thinking about, when you were 5 days a week, suddenly you didn't really have time to market the company. You were working full time. So how did you sort of manage that aspect of, okay, I'm not going to have both of these clients forever. How do I keep my pipeline, if you will, full?
Not as well as I should have. And people warned me about that, but it just kept coming. So it kept coming from the same private equity company. I then, was interim at another company called Brightly Software. And, I tried to network when I could. Some of the things I did when I started is I got some really good folks that were good at creative and writing to help me upgrade my website. So I have a website which is called DemandRevenue. It's at DemandRevenue.com, explains what I do. And I haven't gotten a lot of leads from the website, but what's really good about it, and my real intention was when there was an opportunity, I wanted to show folks that I was serious about this and I had a professional website. And one thing from a networking standpoint, and I'm not the greatest networker, but I love doing it, Drew, that I did is I got a lot of people to write testimonials about my work. So an advantage I had in building the network, frankly, is that I mentored 108 CMOs when I was at Serious Decisions in Forrester, and that helped a lot. So I know a lot of CMOs that I've helped. And a lot of them wrote testimonials on my website, on LinkedIn, and I ported that over to my website. So that was one thing. So I have a lot of testimonials there, and I've done some case studies since I've started. I also wrote some blogs because, and this is something, fractional work started with CFOs. There are tons of fractional CFOs. It's moving to CMOs and it's exploding. And there are a lot of people that say they're fractional CMOs that have never been a CMO or never even been an interim CMO. So you have to be able to pick through. So I've written some blogs that are on my website, top 8 blogs, what to look for in a fractional or interim CMO and what to look for in a CMO Executive Advisor, because there are a lot of people that say they are that don't have the experience. So it's really important to be able to vet through. But I'd say, updating my website, doing some blogging, having testimonials on there, and my LinkedIn profile as well, spent a lot of time there. And I set up an LLC. So personally, what I've done in my time, 3 things. So I've been an interim or fractional CMO, and I'll get to the difference in a moment that I think it is. I've been a CMO Executive Advisor and coach. And then I've also done some quarterly projects. Now, for FinThrive and for Brightly, I was 4 days a week. I was operating as the CMO. I was on the ELT. I was going to all the meetings and basically operating just as the CMO, but on an interim basis until they hired a full-time CMO. Then with FinThrive, when they hired the full-time CMO, who was a past client of mine, I stayed on for another 1.5 years, but I pivoted to be her coach and advisor. The other example where I think it was more fractional, I was a fractional CMO only 1 day a week for a venture-funded health IT company that had gone through a B round, like a 20 million round. And even though I led the marketing team, I was only 1 day a week, and that was more fractional. But in all 3 cases, it was to fill a gap between not having a CMO or the old CMO leaving and the time it takes to bring on a new full-time CMO. So what I like to do is be interim and then stay and help the CMO that's hired be successful, which I've done.
Is the difference between an interim CMO, which could be 4 or 5 days a week, and a fractional CMO, I think is important that we sort of clarify, because to me, the idea of a fractional is you're a company that likes the idea of having a CMO, but you don't have the budget
Right.
necessarily to pay for a top level experienced person. So, but you'll pay 2 or 3 days, you'll pay a fractional amount to get high level strategic guidance to help you through a particular growth stage until you can hire someone full time.
Or you may never hire someone full time, or you may want to hire the fractional full time. It depends on it's all depending on the relationships, but that's very true. That's another application of it.
Right. And I think, Jay, goes back to, if we think about the differences in the definition, the roles that CMOs play in organizations, but I mean, we just take the folks here and what they do and don't do, the variations on the job are so broad that it's the same thing applies to fractional. It depends on the need. But let's talk about it, stepping back from your standpoint. What would you do differently in terms of if you were starting again with the goal of being an independent CMO who works short periods of time for different companies in the capacity as a CMO? What would you do differently to get this business off the ground and going?
I mean, it's worked really well the past 2 years, Drew. I think,
Okay. So I had a network. I tapped in the network. I got some opportunities, and that led to other opportunities. Yeah. And I guess that's the sort of the big lesson.
Yeah.
And I'm imagining also, because each of these situations are different, are you trying to build a consistent methodology that you use in each of these things, so that you do have consistent case histories that, I was a fractional CMO at this company. Here are the things that I did. This is what the outcome is. Or are the situations so different that that's impossible?
Well, I've got case studies on what I've done and some of them, and, it's situations different, but there are some things that are pretty common. Like in each of these cases, I've joined the ELT. I've worked very cross-functionally. I think of myself more as a business person than just a CMO. And I think that's important, because I like to bring the creative and the analytics.
Wait a second. I'm sorry. Did you just say just a CMO? Huh?
Well, just marketing. I try to think of myself in a business sense.
Yeah.
Where cross-functional alignment is really critical.
Okay.
Versus
just busting your
a marketing person. I know you are. It's okay. So there are some things that are common. Like, when I'll start, I'll generally do an assessment of the marketing team early on, maybe in the first 4 to 6 weeks of strengths and opportunities. I'll take a look at things like, the demand process, the MarTech stack, the value proposition, things that we would all look at as CMOs and see where they are, see where the maturity is, and depending on the company and what stage they're at, there's, problem market fit, product market fit, platform market fit, see where they are on their journey so I can most help them. So there's generally an assessment phase at the beginning. And then I also have brought on a lot of other vendors and folks that I know where I see gaps in infrastructure that needs to be built. And because I get along really well with CFOs, I started my master's in finance. I'm really good at modeling future, multi-year capabilities to build, and work with CFOs and the board to get a long-term strategy approved. So those are some things I've done. In terms of putting that all into a productized, that's something I've thought about. I also know, since I was at Serious Decisions so long, I know all the CMO models and frameworks and the others that, I could do that, but I haven't had time in 2 years. Drew, this is the first break I've had in 2 years, which is kind of nice.
Yeah.
I'm doing a lot more networking and social media now. But it's been a great 2 years. The wonderful thing about doing this is helping companies. And when you're either interim or fractional, you can be very open with your opinions and people listen. I mean, what can they do? Fire you?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
so, no, you're the expert from out of town. You get a free pass in terms of being able to be honest and no, it's amazing. I want to just put a point here that I thought was so interesting, that because marketing problems are not something that an individual can solve, and often it's not just the team that you have doing the assessment of the team, The fact is, there's other resources that you bring to the table. So it's not just you solving the problem.
Right.
You would, right? You identify a problem and say, oh, I know someone who can fix this.
Exactly.
You bring them in. And obviously at that point, you've made some good friends by doing that. But it makes sense to be thinking about this solution of fractional from a broader standpoint than just what you personally can contribute. And,
Yes,
and I think that's and you know, let's face it, you all know that as being a regular full-time CMO, but having, you know, your trusted folks is important. Yeah, I'm still sort of digesting the just CMO because I have to say, in our huddles, in the people in this community are not just marketers.
Yeah.
They all have another plus on top of it. I mean, and so I want to defend them for the moment, but I also want to, I think the question that I'm going to ask you is, from a fractional standpoint, what is the plus that matters?
Well, I've carried a bag, so I've been in sales, and that usually provides a lot of credibility. I've been a GM, so I've had marketing, sales, and product reporting to me in a couple of instances. But what I will say, and I've spoken about this a lot and blogged on it a lot, you can't underestimate the relationship between the CMO and the CFO. That's got to be a strong relationship. And the CFO, in addition to the CEO, is your entry to the board. The initiatives I've taken, you know, I've spoken to the board up front. I had really good relationships with the board in addition to the C-suite. And that helps a lot. And I think having some financial skills and ability to speak in business terms, not, I will say, only marketing speak. I mean, there's, you know, we have a lot of terms we use internally, but being able to speak on a business level, I mean, even things like, for example, LTV to CAC, right? Or, you know, future growth. I'm a big believer in customer-led growth. So that's net revenue retention plus the customers that will recommend you to bring you new business. And that's really the franchise you have to grow going forward. I can have that conversation with a CFO all day and talk about LTV and net retention and, you know, and begin that dialogue. And that's really important. I think being able to develop those cross-functional relationships quickly is an important part of this role for credibility. Does that make sense?
It does, totally. It's funny because in the recap that went out to all the huddlers on personal branding, I quoted one of the CMOs who talked about their analytical ability and how in this individual's team, no one on the team is allowed to say, I'm not good at math. They all have to be able to say, we're good at math. We understand math. We get math. Math is important to us, which speaks to, again, the language of the business. And so anyway, it made me laugh because that is that individual's CMO plus. It's they're this strong analytics, and they want to bring that to the whole team.
I have to say that, Drew. It reminds me of this. So I've taught some courses at Emerson College in Boston, where I live, and it was a global marketing communications graduate program. And I taught some courses on how CMOs can talk to CFOs and CEOs to get programs approved. And people were from all over the world, you know, the US were minorities. And I always got the same question at the beginning. Is there going to be math? Is there going to be math? How much? I said, just a little bit of algebra, nothing, you know. Oh, you know, and these are all, you know, graduate students. So it was so funny. Yeah.
Yes, there's going to be math.
Yeah.
It's called revenue, and you need to know how the company makes money and how marketing contributes to it.
Yeah.
So the good part of this, what I hear is, one, you're getting rewarded. Two, you're getting listened to. Three, you're making an impact. And all those things sounds really good. What's the downside of this world?
Yes, I'll get there. I just wanted to add a fourth to that, and that's you're developing relationships. You're developing strong relationships, and I'm a relationship guy, and I love that. I mean, you know, I love helping companies. The downside is, you know, you've got ups and downs. So I was very lucky. I left Forrester. 2-3 weeks later, I was engaged 5 days a week. That lasted 2 years. And now I'm looking for more work, and I know what's going to happen. It's a timing thing. So I'm trying to connect with other private equity firms and you know, but right now I don't have anything coming in until I, you know, generate more business, which is the vagaries of having your own business. But the last 2 years have been fantastic. So I'm not worried about it, but it's, you know, and it gives me an opportunity to take a break, do more networking. I'm cutting up a video of me presenting at a conference last year. I'm doing more social media and, doing things I haven't had a chance to do in a couple of years. But that's the thing, when you have your own business, you may have ups and downs. And to your point earlier, how good a job did you do working 5 days a week, business development for the next thing? And I'd say I did a shitty job because I was very engaged in what I was doing and enjoying it. So,
well,
yeah,
and this is the point. So when I talk to folks that are about to go in, approach this, I really encourage them to do 4 days a week. So they leave 1 day a week, 1 to breathe, and 2 to market. And I see you nodding your head. So moving forward, can you see yourself keeping to that and turning down that extra day so that you can, yes, that, so
I tell them
moving
now,
forward,
I won't do any more than 4 days a week if someone
right,
wants to full time.
So you'll give yourself that day again, just
yes,
keep the business going and keeping your content out there and so forth.
So I should have listened to you, Drew, at the beginning when you told me.
I can't help it. I can't help it, but the good news is you were making a lot of money with that extra day a week, and that'll now, fund your business development at this point.
Yeah.
So it's all good. And, you got to go with what works for you. And sometimes in the moment, you make a choice. So when you think about this, the business development part is a really scary part for a lot of folks. And it's one of the reasons why people look at going to a chief outsiders, which is all fractional, everything, right? And of course, the challenge of that is that they take a pretty big percentage of it, and you still have to do a lot of your own hunting, but there's infrastructure and so forth. Let's talk. And so the people that I think are best for chief outsiders are the ones who really want to do the work, but aren't really as entrepreneurial, don't want to have to deal with the company. And so what's your take on some of those fractional organizations that really, who is it that good for?
Well, I think they're great organizations. Outsiders has grown a lot. I've spoken to them a few times. Frankly, it's not a fit for me because they take half of what you make, and I already give like 38% to the IRS. So I like keeping the rest. But I love to network and I enjoy business development, even though I haven't focused on it as much as I should when I was busy. But a lot of folks may just want to do the work and may not want to do business development, or you may not have as much of a network to draw from. At the beginning, to your point earlier, Drew, where a chief outsiders or some of these other fractional CMO groups, there's Chameleon, that takes a lot less. They take maybe a third instead of a half of what you make. And there are others, Drew, Brett Schlar has one called, I forget the name, but there are a bunch of these sprouting up. And if you don't have as much of a network, or you really don't want to spend a lot of time networking and business development, that may be a better fit. It wasn't for me, maybe because I got lucky at the beginning, but I enjoy networking. So
there is one other aspect that I've heard and that I'm reminded just in defense of that is those folks do feel like they have resources. They have a community of people they can talk to and share, and sometimes even bring to the table as a result of the network. And there's a methodology that all of the folks at Chief Outsider use. So, and there's some other resources. So again,
you get that with CMO Huddles, can't you?
Yes, you can. Yes, you can.
And you're not paying me for that, but
no, thank you.
But there are a lot of, there's CMO Huddles, there's CMO Coffee Talk on Fridays, there's Pavilion, there's a lot of other resources where you can get that and you can get a network, I think, today. That's changing a lot. The world's changing.
The world is changing and we huddle on. So as we sort of wrap up at least this first part of it, I think we've covered the benefits. I think we've covered some of the challenges. When you do these engagements, first of all, how long is a typical one as a fractional?
Well, 2 of them have been 6 months. And then one was like almost 2 years. And the one that was almost 2 years, and it was actually written up in the press and there's a video on it, that was ThinThrive. I was interim for 6 months.
Right.
And then new CEO came in that I knew, and the new CMO that was hired was a past client of mine. So I stayed on and I was her mentor and advisor for another 14 months. And then I started advising the chief customer officer to implement NPS 3.0 and some of those things. So that continued. So I've always had like a 3-month minimum, and it's always been renewed. So I've always done at least 6 months.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about, how do you charge? I mean, you set up a 3-month program. How do you work that?
Okay. I have a simple mind. I like to keep things simple. So I don't work on an hourly basis. I only work on a retainer basis. I have a 3-month minimum, try to make that 6 months. And the way, I've got 2 charging models. So if it's a company where I'm fractional or interim, it's based on how many days per week I work. So if I work 1 day a week, that's 4 to 5 days a month, and I charge a certain amount per month. Since I have a quarter minimum, I'll talk to the CEO up front and say, please talk to the CFO. The way I work is I get paid by the middle of the month where I work, or latest at the end. And since it's a 3-month minimum, for signing up for 3 months, if you need an invoice, I'll give you 3 invoices now for those 3 months. Expect to be paid by around the middle. Want to make sure your CFO is comfortable with it. Next thing I'll do, when I start working with a company, I'll get on their Teams or whatever internal communication they use, and I'll find out who the AP admin person is, and I'll make friends with that person. So around the middle of each month, I'll say, hey, when's it coming? Is it processed yet? And I can say, at least so far, first 2 years, I've never not been paid. I haven't had any invoicing issues. And there's a free invoicing app I use to generate an invoice. And it's, I just try to keep it simple, and it's worked really well.
Is there a size or profile of the customers of the companies that you've worked for that seem to find the fractional appealing?
Well, the 3 private equity portfolio companies I've worked with precisely is 900 million. FinThrive is now about 450 million after doing a couple of acquisitions. And Brightly Software was just acquired by Siemens Infrastructure, but they're a 200 million SaaS software company that's part of a 3.3 billion Siemens division. Now they were sold. Those were 3 Clear Lake portfolio companies, the private equity firm that I coincidentally was into at the beginning. I also worked I was fractional for a company called Linus Health. That was a digital health company in the Alzheimer's space. And they were less than $1 million, but they had a 20 million funding. This one came from an old boss of mine who was an advisor to their portfolio, to the VC firm. And they, that was the one that was 1 day a week. And, so that was a smaller company. So I've worked both with venture emerging company and larger companies, but generally with private equity, it's larger, it's mid-volume firms getting to the next level, if that makes sense.
One of the interesting things about this, and we're going to wrap up, but you can spend time because you're interim and you can focus on, as you said, strategy and people development, and you can do that. And sometimes even help them if they know they have a problem child, you probably can help there. And so, but one of the parts that we talk a lot about in CMO Huddles of being a great CMO, and I'm sorry, JD left because he thinks the next title of my next book should be, I was talking to a customer the other day, because that's the most powerful thing any CMO can say in the C-suite is. So that's probably one thing you can't do as much because they either, you're going to be leaving, and I don't know. So how does that work?
I like to try to talk to some customers up front, but it doesn't always work out that way, to be timing. But I've initiated some research projects too with vendors where they'll poll customers. And that's a good point, Drew, because I love working with customers, but it's hard when you're not
right. It's
internal.
Just something,
So
it's part of it. You're going to have to give that up. And that's cool. And I think that's part of the thing you need to know. Also, if you're doing this, you may not be able to be on the customer advisory board or set, those, you're going to have to get that some other place. So interesting. All right. So let's wrap this up with, if you're thinking about being a fractional CMO, 2 do's and 1 don't.
Leverage your network. Our biggest limitations are here. So stay confident. I've said this many times. My favorite quote is from Winston Churchill. The definition of success is moving from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. So our biggest limitations in our own head. So those are 2 do's. 1 don't. I don't know how to say this, but even though you're interim or fractional, you become part of them for the time you're there. So don't discount, even if you're not going to be there forever, do not discount the value of developing relationships, because we never know how we can help each other, whether it's there or somewhere else. or whether
Right.
they need you again. That's really critical.
Got it. All right. Well, Alan, thank you for joining us today. It was really a really insight-rich conversation. Hopefully, all of you got some good feedback here and some food for thought. I mean, number one, as you said, build that network. And
Yes.
and of course, we're here to help you do that at CMO Huddles. All right, Alan, thank you. Thank you all.